I've known Chris since elementary school, and during the 2 years we lived together in this apartment, he hasn't changed much. He's still into sci-fi and fantasy, still a little bit shy and awkward around new people. He still struggles with weight and confidence issues, and he's still one of the most thoughtful people I know. Or at least, he was until recently. Between my dead-end warehouse job and family drama, I've got my own issues, but I try to help Chris with his problems just as he always been there for me during mine. I was the one who first suggested to Chris that he use dating apps to make friends and maybe find something more. It had worked for me in the past, and I figured that if Chris could message back and forth a bit to build up his confidence, he might have a little more success. That makes this my fault, at least partially. But let's face it, I was worried about the guy. He hadn't met anyone new since high school, and the recent pandemic limited his options even more. Without access to the game shops and conventions that were usually the only place he felt comfortable socializing, Chris retreated further and further into shell. He still talked my ear off, just like old times, but I was worried about what might happen if I moved out or started dating someone seriously myself. Chris wouldn't have anyone left. Maybe I pushed him too hard. Maybe I ignored the signs. It's not like the profile he showed me looked photoshopped or fake. The girl had more than one picture, and she looked normal enough. She could even carry on a conversation, although the messages Chris showed me were a bit strange. It was like he'd been messaging back and forth with a dictionary. I figured she was just being formal. After all, maybe she was a little shy too. It's true that her grin was a little big, and her eyes seemed so wide and eager, but that could have just been a trick of the light. I didn't want to discourage my pal from his first opportunity in years, just based on some weird vibe I was getting. She had suggested that they meet, and I told Chris to go for it. That was about 3 days ago. On the night of their date, I remember smirking when the clock passed midnight. My buddy Chris had finally scored. I was still up gaming in the living room when Chris came in around 3 a.m. When he ignored my question and walked dreamily toward his bedroom, I figured he was just tired, or hopefully, too pleased to speak. Even when Chris hadn't left his room by 2 p.m. the next day, I wasn't concerned. He had a late night. Sleeping late was typical Chris behavior too, and I was gonna be late for my shift. I didn't start to feel concerned until I came home late that night. The kitchen had been ransacked so badly, I thought we'd been broken into, and the smell coming from the bathroom could have gagged a maggot. A half-eaten can of refried beans was splattered like blood across the floor. Drawers and cabinets hung open. Ripped open plastic packages and crumbs were everywhere. The mess led straight to Chris's room, but his door was shut tight. I was exhausted from 8 hours of lugging cardboard boxes around the warehouse, so I made a mental note to talk to Chris about his cleaning and eating habits before collapsing into bed. The ransacked kitchen was unchanged when I woke up. With a sigh, I knocked on my roommate's bedroom door. "Chris?" I asked. No response. I opened the door with a grimace. This room, too, smelled awful, and with the blinds closed and lamp off, it was incredibly dark. I could barely make out the shape of Chris's chest rising and falling beneath the bed sheets. He was breathing like someone on a respirator. "Chris?" I tried again, a little louder. I stepped in something and cursed as I made my way toward the bedside lamp, the only source of light in Chris's room. I felt for the switch and clicked it on. The room was an even worse disaster than the kitchen, but it was nothing compared to Chris. He looked swollen. His skin puffed out as though he were having an allergic reaction, so much so that it seemed he couldn't even open his eyes. His skin was covered in sweat and the remains of food, and his belly beneath the sheets. It was so large it seemed distended. I didn't have much time to stare, however, because Chris's inflated hand started flailing around for the light. He smacked it blindly, plunging the room back into darkness. A horrible wheezing sound came from his throat. "Chris, dude, you're scaring me," I shouted. "What's going on?" Bloated fingers closed around my neck. It was like Chris was trying to pull me toward his face and shove me away at the same time. I was shaken like a rag doll. Since when had my roommate been so strong? I fell into the disgusting trash on the floor and hurried for the door, slamming it behind me. That plain white door with my roommate's name written on the chalkboard had seemed so plain and ordinary just a few minutes ago, but now it was like the doorway to some awful nest. I kept my eyes fixed on the knob, and I realized I was horrified of seeing my roommate in the light if he came out. I tried to plan my next move, wondering if I could call for help. Chris didn't have any medical insurance though. With a slam, my roommate's door flew open. I squeezed my eyes shut and froze as he barreled towards me and past me to the bathroom. I peered around the corner and saw my roommate on his knees in front of the toilet in a position I was all too familiar with. I almost felt relieved. Was that it? Just a hangover and allergic reaction to some weird cocktail? I went over to Chris, ready to put my hand on his shoulder and ask him what I could do for him. He was retching, but nothing was coming out. At first, that was before I noticed the enormous bulge in Chris's throat. It was like something that had been growing in his stomach was finally making its way out. As sickening as the sight was, I didn't react right away. Not until I saw the first tendril, white and nerve-like, probing out of my friend's mouth. More followed. They reached out blindly for anything they could touch, including me. I shrieked and backed away from the lengthening forest of pale tendrils. It seemed impossible that the writhing mass in front of me could have all fit inside of Chris, but what they were dragging out of him was even worse. The tendrils arranged themselves like spider legs, pushing against the bathroom counter, the toilet, and the walls. Chris collapsed as they heaved something out of his throat. It was a fetus, but not like any human baby that I'd ever seen. For one, it was fully alive and mobile, twisting to get free of the tendrils it had used to escape from my friend's body. It gnawed on itself until it got free, landing on the floor with a sickening splat. Before I could react or even scream, the gooey, squirming, horrifically human-looking thing scurried away down the bathroom vent. The forest of tendrils that had birthed it began to wither and cave in over my friend's body. I grabbed Chris's wrist, but I didn't need the lack of pulse to tell me that he was dead. Much too late, I called emergency services. The first responders were ordinary police, but when they saw the scene in my bathroom, they made another call, and the two men who arrived a few minutes later didn't look like the agents of any law enforcement agency that I'd ever heard of. They didn't even identify themselves, instead relying on the police to convince me to talk. Not that I needed much prodding. I was already blabbling like a lunatic, and I would have done or said anything to get an explanation for what I'd just seen. They asked me if I shared any fluids or any meals with my roommate recently. They asked if we kissed, or if he put his mouth on my body at all. Then, without answering a single one of my questions, they sterilized the place and left, taking what was left of Chris with them. The two agents had a hushed conversation beneath the window of the second-floor apartment. I couldn't hear all of it, but I did catch two phrases: "My God," and "They found a new way to breed." Shout out to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacey, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I really look forward to making more content for everyone.